My name is Jacqueline Lane. Welcome to What I Wish I Knew. Throughout my career and really my life, I've had this general curiosity. What makes people tick and how do businesses work when you kind of peek under the covers? So at Verisant, we aim to have meaningful conversations on topics that sales professionals and leaders and business professionals across an organization care about and that they might want to know more about. So in this What I Wish I Knew series, I'm really excited to talk to industry leaders so they can share their experiences and insights with all of you. Today, I have Bruce Jackson with me, and he has a rock star track record of leading teams and companies to success. Today, Bruce works with BHG. They are thought leaders in sales performance management and delivering best practices around things like incentive comp, sales planning, and kind of extracting insights from all of those processes around those things. So in prep and in previous conversations with Bruce, we talked a little bit about his experience in navigating business in tough times, when it's a little more volatile, a little more unexpected. So he's also shared some tactics to change the narrative within your organization and then translate that to business success. So today we're going to be talking about three key things: what Bruce has experienced in the past in terms of navigating tough times, and maybe giving some tidbits to people for things that they could try themselves. The second thing is, what can you do with your sellers to keep them motivated and interested to keep selling, even when it's harder to sell than ever before? Third thing is getting into how we can use analytics and modeling and AI as a way to feel more confident in making those business decisions. If you have questions, please feel free to hop in at the end or put it in the chat as we go. Bruce, over to you. Welcome.
Well, good afternoon, Jacqueline. And it's really nice to be on today, and I'm excited to talk about these different topics since they're so relevant, especially in this year and at this time of year.
Thanks. Thank you for being here. In looking at the experience that you've had at smaller companies, opening up your own businesses, and at really, really big companies, you shared that you've had, a wide variety of experiences. There's certainly been the heydays where all you were doing is receiving phone calls. But there's been these tough times, right? So I think a lot of business leaders similar to you, who maybe aren't as experienced in leading in these times, they're wondering how to navigate during these times. So can you share with me how you've done it in the past and any changes that you can suggest to some people who are listening?
Sure, I absolutely can. And to give you a sense, I mean, I started in what's now called sort of sales performance management in 1999, and so I've been in the space almost 25 years now. I, as you said, have done it across both small startup companies, been working with some very, very large clients that are Fortune 100 companies. And the interesting thing I think I find is no matter what the size of the company, whenever we go through these economic turns, either up or down, everybody sort of seems to feel a lot of the same pains. We see sales organizations struggle a little bit because sales cycles tend to lengthen. I think this year in particular, we're seeing companies become a little bit more conservative in their spending. Partially due to the economy for sure. I think that's a big play in it. I think we're also leading into an election year. And historically, if I look back over the last, 25 years, we certainly have seen that going into an election year at the same time as a slowdown in an economy has led companies to be that much more conservative. And so that's leading to perhaps longer sales cycles for the sales team members. That's leading to a little bit of questioning for companies around their go-to-market strategies. And, did we have the right one at the beginning of the year? Or more importantly, did we have the right one at the beginning of the year? And now we're kind of halfway through the year, a little over halfway through the year, and we've got to maybe tweak it a little bit as we go into these next 4 months. And so that's sort of where I often see companies starting to lean a little bit into their base of knowledge, leaning into the use of their analytics to really start pulling back. What are some of the territories or areas within our global footprint that are doing very well? Where are some that are perhaps being hampered a little bit more by economic conditions,
Mhm.
and start to lean in a little bit to those products that are still seeing very high demand. Lean into products are seeing high demand in very specific areas, and surfacing that up and working with their sales teams to ensure they know where to start to lean in some of those different areas as well, keeping and then really keeping in mind that some of these sales cycles will be lengthened, but they're not lost. So keeping the motivation up is another thing that I think we're going to talk a little bit about today that will be an important criteria here as well.
Yeah, so the things that you mentioned, there are lots of things that it feels like you have a sense of control over, and then there's a number of things that you just simply don't have control over. And so as we talk about the things that are out of your control and the need to kind of lean one way or the other becomes much more important, especially over the next couple of months. We're going to be planning our next session, and it's going to be tied around what do you do in your mid-year? You know, what does a mid-year health check look like? What are the activities you need to do? But that being said, you know, when unforeseen situations come up and you've got your plan, because most organizations build a plan and then they put it away
Yeah.
until months before the end of the year, and then it's like, well, we're not even close. What can we do quick to close up your Q4?
Yeah.
So we talked about or you touched on a couple of things as we talked through. One is certainly seller morale. The second is modifying your go-to-market motions, right? So the tactics that you use as a way to guide your sellers. So perhaps we can start with either, but you know, there's the seller morale piece, and there's the go-to-market motion for leaning into products, geos, industries. Why don't we chat about seller morale?
Sure. And we can talk about seller morale because I think that's one of the most important things, especially at this time of year and in a year like this, where I think it's been very difficult for many sellers to gain traction within some of their accounts. As I talk to clients, as we talk to clients, certainly sales forecasting has been a bit of a challenge this year for folks. Some of the deals have pushed. That obviously impacts seller morale. And as you said, this is kind of a very interesting part of the year as well, because for many companies and for salespeople in general, they've started to look at where they're at as far as quota attainment for this year goes, and they've started to project out to try to forecast based on their sales pipeline. Where do I think I'm going to be with respect to my quota by the end of the year? And that's always done at a company level. It's also done at an individual level. And when you talk about salespeople morale, as they get to this point, if they start to really not see a clear path towards hitting their quota or even coming within, 80 or 90%, so they get some sort of attainment level there, it really impacts the morale, and it starts to feel like, what do I do?
Yeah,
And
it can kind of become insidious almost, because I can picture someone who's at 30% when they're
yeah,
halfway through the year and they're thinking, how can I possibly close the gap? And if it's not going to be 6 months before I close the gap, I'm not going to make any money. And then they start to grumble or they pull the chute. And it's like this water cooler conversation about failure. And it's like, how can you keep them or re-energize them for that path forward?
And that's where I think companies can often step in a little bit as well. Certainly, we've seen in the past a number of organizations step in and look at either key products or key geographies, or even just generally overall looking at giving additional attainment towards quota relief for each individual sale. So you may decide to change to a 1.5 or a 2 times dollar amount that counts towards quota relief. You're not actually paying 2 times, but you're just giving them that additional amount towards quota relief to help them retire that quota in a more reasonable way. And that gives a little bit of a boost to them because they start to feel a little bit more like, okay, I'm back on track. I can start to see a path in my sales pipeline that allows me to go there. It also helps if they know from their sales leadership, hey, we're giving some additional quota relief or additional attainment on these specific product sets because we've actually seen some good demand for these. We have good availability in our inventory. Let's really go push these particular products and help you get to your quota attainment for the year. And so using that as one of the levers to try to help at this point be sure that your team is well engaged through the end of the year and feeling, strong that they can hit that quota for the year is an important piece.
So it sounds kind of like there's two pieces that dovetail or dovetail, whichever the way a tail doves. Um, um, so it's not about quota relief without any other research, without any other go-to-market motion that's tied to it. It's quota relief or double credit for things where you believe they're going to be more successful, and will continue to help achieve some of the business objectives as well. So not just about kind of making people feel good, but also pushing them in a place where the business needs to go anyways.
And I think you bring in a really great point too about the analytics piece of it, right? Is any decision like this shouldn't be made without some sort of basis of knowledge. And everybody has some of the best sales data available to them in their sales commission system because it's looked at by many eyeballs many times a day over the course of the year. And this is a great time for you to be able to take some of that information and surface it up to understand, do we just have a particular product that just isn't, it's just lagging this year? Maybe the demand just isn't there, but we have these others that are. And then, understanding too, you mentioned quota relief. We see some companies that choose to give an actual quota relief where they bring down quota from where they set it at the beginning of the year to maybe 70% of that instead. And we tell people to get that. Oftentimes what we find is there's a concern within companies that sets a little bit of a dangerous precedent, because if you are at $100,000 quota this year, but then we drop it down and give you quota relief to 70,000. If we now come back to you next year and say we want 10% growth, all of a sudden you go from a 70,000 quota to 110,000 quota, and it seems that much more unattainable. And to your point, then you'll likely see an exodus of salespeople going out the door. So that's why in general, we like to say you set your quotas at the beginning of the year with all the best information you had available. Let's look at things like, some additional, double quota counting or double counting of sales towards quota relief, but let's not move that quota itself.
So I'm internally working on this project to make our customer references really sing for our clients so that they become this asset that generates confidence with our clients. And so similarly, that involves training throughout. So in times of, longer sales cycles, people having to spend 5 times as much time to close a deal and it come in eventually, working like twice as hard to get half the commission. How important is, training your reps to handle negotiations, to shorten sales cycles? Like, how much time do you devote to that? Have you tried that in the past?
So I think that's absolutely critical. And I think that the sales teams that tend to weather these more difficult economic times tends to be the ones where the company has made that investment on a very continual basis. It's not a quick fix. It's not something you can just drop in, although you can certainly start to put things in place now around areas like better negotiation skills, better objection handling, how to even better understand where the customer is coming from their own standpoint, so that you can have a better conversation at the table. I think companies that do the best in these economic conditions are often the ones that come to the table looking to partner as best as they can, understanding that these are challenging times for everybody. The business that's making the purchase has their own challenges behind the scenes with their sales motions, with their delayed sales cycles. And so I think, certainly there are some things that we have been able to do in the past where we've come in and done some very specific training at specific points to help. I think it's a continuous evolution of sales training itself, and always making sure that your team has some of the best knowledge available to them on how to, as I say, how to handle the objections, how to keep a longer sales cycle moving forward, because oftentimes in longer sales cycles, it gets to that point for salespeople where it's kind of like, I've done all that I can do. What more do I do? And then it tends to lag a bit. how do you keep the motion and how do you keep the momentum moving forward, even if it's at a slower pace, so that you do eventually come to a point of closing the deal.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point that you make, is that maybe the type of training that people need, the type of negotiation, the type of objection handling, and even really an elevation of empathy for the buyer, right? That the fact is, like, people want to be more certain while they're willing to invest. They need to make sure that it's ironclad, their decision, and it's going to make them look good, and it's really, really low risk. So I think that's the situation we're in now versus, during heyday periods. It's a very different type of sale and seller maybe that you need. I think either way, we talked about, pipeline health and data as it pertains to, seller data and compensation data being some of the cleanest you have. And then being able to leverage that data, pipeline data, historical sale data, geo data, that kind of stuff, to help guide your path forward. So to help your leaders, sales leaders, make confident decisions about the choices they're going to make. So let's chat a little bit about, pipeline health, how you can tweak comp that might impact positively the way that sellers behave and the performance of the business. We can get into either of them.
No, absolutely. And what's, what I find very interesting is that the typical questions that get asked by executive teams, especially going into this time of year, are relatively consistent from one year to the next. It's always, okay, here, we're here, we know we need to be there, and what do we need to do to get there? It's never a big surprise that those questions are going to be coming. But what often we see is it turns into a little bit of a fire drill of, pulling data from a variety of different sources and putting them into Excel spreadsheets, and then, crunching the numbers in Excel spreadsheets and bringing in the marketing team. And it just turns into this little bit of a fire drill to try to figure out, well, how do we answer the question from our executive team, which generally just boils down to one thing: how do we close the gap between what we forecasted we were going to sell and where we're at now? Mm-hmm. And so I think that ability to be able to continually be looking at your sales pipeline and having a very good, comfortable feel around the forecast for that sales pipeline becomes one critical piece of the puzzle. I think that the other is looking at your sales data and seeing, do I historically have any seasonality within my sales? Some industries are, very seasonal just in their sales in general. Others have products that sell better at one time of year versus the other. So it's knowing when those particular products are hot and making sure that those are really at the forefront of your salespeople's time. It's only what time of year you're in. And then it's knowing how your incentive plans align with all of that. And so I think with the serious advancements that we've seen in analytics over the last few years, some of the introduction of the natural language processing and the ability to be able to really, with just a few clicks on a keyboard, be able to bring back very quickly some good data related to your sales, your forecast, and those sorts of things. You're getting a good data set to be able to answer, hey, we have this gap, but if we break it down, we really know that this product is hot in the fourth quarter, this product's hot in the fourth quarter. And if we could just increase by 15% our sales over last year in those particular areas, that would get us to our number. And that's where we often see, quite honestly, companies will introduce a short-term spiff or a sales contest in the fourth quarter that gives people, a little bit of an extra incentive. And for those who may be trailing behind a little bit on their quota, I like short-term sales incentives where it gives them additional sales credit towards their quota. Some people like the ones where if you sell a widget, you get an extra $10, but I like the ones that retire quota quicker because ultimately on a cost to sales perspective, you're always going to have the executive team saying, well, if we're giving a little more here, are we paying more for something that would have already closed? Or are we truly making a strategic investment of our sales compensation dollars here? And that's where I like to be able to really push towards the quota.
Well, it's interesting that you like. I think that you're always thinking about the cost of commission and the ultimate cost of sale. And in previous conversations, we talked about creating urgency to bring a deal in that's going to close anyways. Are we going to
Yeah.
pay more for someone to bring it in faster? And I think it really comes down to modeling and the ability for you to model the different scenarios and choose the most likely best case scenario. And last time we spoke, I said, I feel like I shouldn't ask this, but I had to ask this. How have you modeled your different scenarios in the past? And tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I think like everybody, we started by modeling everything in Microsoft Excel, and for those that hear that probably cringe and think of all the late nights we spent trying to, build these Excel models that that probably could have taken us to the moon if we'd really looked at them close enough. But and then always came back and found the little mistakes where I fat figured something because I've got fat figures and stuff. So I think Excel is still used by a lot of companies, but I think it tends to get used when the question comes and you don't have any other way to get the answer. You got to pull together something quickly, and so Excel gets used for that. I think more and more companies are trying to move away from that and get into more of a continuous evaluation cycle throughout the year. I see a lot of companies using products like Vericent where they have a dedicated modeling environment where they're bringing in real live transactions. They have perhaps some tweaks to the incentive compensation plan that reside within that model environment that they can then run the sales transactions against, and they can see what the end result was as far as payout would go at different levels of attainment towards quota. And that starts to give them some really good insights. And I think executives appreciate the fact when they can start to understand, okay, if 70% of our people hit 75% of their quota with this new change, it means an additional spend of X dollars. Those numbers in that way really help. And I think the other advantage too is we see companies starting to do that throughout the year, so that the sales planning cycle, which we're just starting to enter into now, does not become something that everybody is kind of starting from scratch with a whiteboard to say, okay, where do we go from here? They've already been running different scenarios throughout the year of different sales incentive commission components, different approaches, different quotas, different territory mixes even, so that they can now just take that data and begin to analyze it and really come out with what the best parts of each one are. And that really drives their sales planning cycle through the end of the year. And I think gives them the confidence as they go into next year that the decisions they've made have been based primarily on the data that's been coming out through the year, versus sometimes that gut feel that comes into play.
Yeah, and it's interesting that it's almost like this pretty stark comparison between the annual fire drill or the regular fire drill of the surprise questions that everybody asks every single year.
Right.
We're going to ask these same 10 questions. Let's go information versus
here it comes.
Yeah, it's not shocking, but it's still a fire drill. And then the other end of the spectrum is, the ability to use the data all in one place so that you can detect trending on more regular basis than on an annual basis, make decisions that make sense in the shorter term, and thus shrinking the ups and downs, hopefully. So AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning, ChatGPT, all of the things that everyone is talking about. Tell me how you use AI. Tell me kind of your take on it as you look to evaluate your sales organization and kind of moving it forward for success.
Yeah, it is the topic that everybody's been talking about for just about the last couple years. I can't turn on any of the financial news without that being the third that's used. So I think that it's obviously a technology that is evolving at a really great pace. It's got a lot of momentum behind it. Certainly, a couple of use cases that we're using it for. One is to better understand, the sales pipeline, and to do some analysis against the pipeline. And what I find with these technologies is it gives us a much easier way to be able to interact with the data. So we can very quickly pull back an answer to a question. Whether we're sitting in an executive boardroom, just having one of our meetings, it's easy for us to just pull back and say, well, what percentage of our opportunities fell out of the sales pipeline at this particular stage? And that then leads us down the path of saying, okay, do we have a training issue there? Do we have a sales enablement issue there? Get our sales leaders together to be able to address that. The same thing applies on the compensation side as well. As we're trying to look at, different components within there, when we see people not hitting quota, oftentimes there's a story underneath that of why they're not. And so we can start to do some very quick comparisons of, our top 10 people that are selling a particular set of products against our middle, and see how big is the gap. Is it really that big, or is it not? So I don't, right. I think that the big difference with AI coming in on the analytics side of it is it just gives us, it's that much easier to get access to the data, get the answer back immediately without having to get IT involved. But certainly as well on the commission side, it's also giving us the ability to really put a lot of checks and balances in place as well. And we're just starting to see the use of AI in those modeling environments that I was talking about, where they're starting to bring back interesting pieces of data throughout the year that then get wrapped into the sales planning, sessions towards the end of the year. And I think that will really start to advance the sales planning, but it will also shorten the cycle of sales planning for a lot of different companies.
Yeah. So in my experience and some of the research and work that the team has done, it's at this point, the biggest use case is that it does kind of 80% of the heavy lifting, but it really is like another tool in your tool belt. It's not all encompassing. It doesn't solve every problem on the planet, but what it does is accelerates the retrieval of information so that you can do that, 20% of brain work faster and more of the time, really, than the other time that it normally would take. So at this point, I just wanted to say there were kind of these three big things that through the conversation about, working with organizations in tough times and sellers and improving kind of the go-to-market motions of an organization. A couple of things that I took away from our conversation. First of all, is that compensation decisions and decisions that you make pertaining to your sellers has to be dovetailed with the vision and the go-to-market tactics of the organization. So for example, if you are reducing quota, or if you were double counting, then it has to be for product or industries or geographies where you already see growth. So an element of enabling your sellers with direction. So that's one piece. The second piece is the idea that training has to evolve with our market and the needs of our buyer. So training based on how difficult it is for buyers to buy today, how important it is to be able to sell to 7 to 10 people in the buying group. So training has to evolve as our organization and our market evolves. And the third thing that we talked about was finding ways through digging into data to reduce fire drills from an annual event to a much smaller, predictable, more regular mini fire drills. So those are the big three things I took out of it. So big thank you. And now we get to move into some quick speed questions. What is one piece of advice you have for a seller starting out in a sales career?
Listen more, talk less. I think that's one of the things that we all, when we first start out in our career, we think we need to do all the talking. I think, listening to your buyer's needs is one of the most important things these days.
Agreed. Agreed. I like that one a lot. I think listen more, talk less kind of applies to life in general. Um, what advice should a seller absolutely ignore?
That technology is the end all be all to selling in this world. I think that technology has taken us a long way and gives us a lot of great benefits and gives us a lot of access to data. But when you're in the room with a prospective client, put the phone down and focus on building the relationship.
Mhm. I like that a lot because it's this is the part where I consistently want to have conversation, but we're in the quick question segment, so I can't.
Right.
Um, tell, tell me three ingredients that you believe are key to a productive sales culture.
I believe first of all, a very positive sales culture overall, one that's very encouraging. I believe one that has, very clean, consistent access to information. Salespeople always like to know where they stand. And the more that you can give them in almost a B2C type of a feel is important. And then the third thing I think is one where the sales planning has set them up to be successful for the year. Uh, there's nothing more discouraging than be the salesperson that's at 30% in September. So, really using all the tools you have available to set them up for success with quotas and territories, etc.
Thank you. So tell me, what was your very first job?
My very first job, believe it or not, and some people won't even remember this, I pumped gas at a gas station in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, where it was minus 30 in the winter and the gas caps were still on the back of the car. And nobody shut their engine off, but they did open the window a bit so they could smoke. So that was
Well, this is why you're ready to handle tough
myself and
conditions.
all of this. But yeah, my first job was to sell cars or to pump gas. And my sales job was to ask them if they needed the oil check so we could try to get people in to do oil changes.
I like it. That's the next level of service we don't get when I pump my own gas. Um, what would you say, or in your experience, what has been your very favorite place to travel?
Definitely Madrid. Absolutely love it. I would love to one day spend a lot more time there.
Well, I in another conversation, I want to know everything. Very final question, and the topic of this very series is: what do you wish you knew more about?
I truly have found, it's at the 25 years I've been doing this, and I learned something new all the time. It's what's kept me in this business for as long as it has. I love hearing customer anecdotes of how things are going in the sales cycles, how the sales motions are. It changes from year to year, it seems, with the increased advent of technology, with different buyers being involved, with different economic cycles. So I think I'd love to have a crystal ball and be able to predict some of this before it came down upon us. But I'm just finding that I continue to learn new ways from the people around me on how to address some of these things and how to get through some of the better times really well and the more difficult times even better.
Well, it sounds like you wish that you had a crystal ball more than anything else.
Yes, I do. I would love to be able to do that. That would really be great.
Well, that can buy us all one when you find yours.
I will
Um,
definitely do that.
so I would like to say a giant thank you, Bruce. You know your perspective on how you have worked with organizations, both in growth times and more challenging times, has been really helpful. I'm sure people will find a ton of value, and I want to say a big thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline. I really appreciate it. And thanks for having me on.